The Sharon and Karen Case: Reforming Legal Recognition of Lesbian Rights. Starting in April 1984, Karen Thompson's quest for guardianship of her hospitalized partner Sharon Kowalski became an argument for reform in the United States' legal system. As the first known case when an individual attempted to gain guardianship of their partner, in re guardianship of Sharon Kowalski Ward was a revolutionary first step for the LGBT community. Karen's dedication to Sharon challenged the 1980s social norm of lesbian partnership not being true and dedicated. During the time of this case, in which fear of the new AIDS epidemic and Ronald Reagan's conservative family values campaign created a barrier around queer acceptance, LGBT activists around the country used Karen Thompson's revolutionary fight to jumpstart their movement. The Sharon Kowalski case had enormous symbolic importance for the gay rights movement, as it highlighted negative and prejudiced reactions from America's courts and public, but demonstrated that with determination, bigotry can be overcome. The fight for LGBT rights was relatively obscure until the Stonewall Inn riots of June 28, 1969. These riots were a reaction to police raids of the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in New York's Greenwich Village. The patrons at Stonewall, sick of unimpeded harassment and fueled by reports of police brutality, started throwing bricks and bottles at the officers. This reaction surprised the police, and they were eventually overwhelmed. The revolutionary Stonewall riots lasted for 2 days and brought much publicity to the LGBT rights movement. By the 1980s, however, the momentum of Stonewall was wearing off, and AIDS had begun to spread. The reputation of the movement as a whole was damaged by this epidemic, and President Reagan's response was halting and ineffective, according to his biographer Luke Hannon. By the end of 1983, only 2 years after the first official case, 1,292 people had died of AIDS in America, most of them gay men. This deadly disease perpetuated fear of LGBT people around the nation. With the movement stunted by HIV/AIDS, LGBT activists struggled to find new ways to present their community. Karen Thompson was an unlikely person to provide this new view. In fact, had you talked to her up until November 13, 1983, she would not have called herself a lesbian. Although she lived with Sharon Kowalski in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and had been in a committed relationship for 4 years, Karen later said, "We never discussed being gay, never said the word out loud." This fear was fed by her devout religious beliefs, which condemned homosexuality. Before long, however, she would be thrust out of the closet and have to confront these fears. On November 13, 1983, the car Sharon Kowalski was driving was struck by a drunk driver. She was left partially paralyzed and her speech severely impaired. Soon after the accident, while Sharon was still in the hospital under guardianship of her parents, Karen informed the Kowalskis that she and Sharon were lesbians in a committed relationship. Karen hoped that by telling Sharon's parents about their relationship, they would grant Karen guardianship, a legality not inherently given to homosexual couples. The parents rejected Karen, refused to believe that their daughter was a lesbian, and denied her guardianship. This reaction, although reflective of the public mindset of the time, resulted in the case going to the Minnesota Sherburne County Court to challenge the legality of the parents' decision. On April 25, 1984, Sherburne County District Judge Bruce Douglas cited a need to avoid a contested hearing when he committed to an out-of-court compromise, which appointed Sharon's father Don as her guardian, but gave Karen some rights. Donald Kowalski, however, reacted negatively to this compromise and returned to the same court, arguing that Karen Thompson was not protecting the good name and reputation of Sharon Kowalski. He said that Karen was only in the case for the money that Sharon would bring her. As a result of the lack of recognition received by lesbian relationships and the negativity surrounding the gay community during the Reagan era, the courts were easily swayed to share Donald's opinion. On July 23, 1985, the district court granted Donald Kowalski full control over his daughter. Given this control, Donald was permitted to move Sharon 200 miles to a nursing home and eliminate Thompson's visitation rights. This decision and the ensuing reaction by Donald Kowalski ignited a revolutionary case that would last 6 more years. This court decision was made even though Minnesota Statute 525.539 states that kinship is not a conclusive factor in determining the best interests of the ward. The judges ignored this important part of Minnesota law and made a decision that allowed Donald Kowalski to separate his own daughter from a woman with whom she shared an intimate relationship.
A human being's quality of life was sacrificed because of people's biases and prejudices. and Sharon will pay forever for that.
In reaction to the decision, Karen branched out for greater support.
You need the press. Even bad press is better than no press. The only way you break something open is to get it out there.
On August 7th, 1988, the New York Times published that the Kowalski parents prevailed in courts to keep Miss Thompson away, and the public began to take notice of the case. With this increased attention, Karen began to speak at gay pride parades and conventions around the nation. Her speeches focused around the fact that lesbian and gay individuals had no social safety nets to justify their relationships and protect their rights. While running for president, the Reverend Jesse Jackson openly admired Karen and her dedication and courage in seeking the best possible care for Sharon Kowalski, her life partner. In addition to the positive recognition, Karen also received hate mail that condemned both her outing of Sharon, as well as the attention that she had brought to what others considered to be the Kowalski's private matter. A monumental display of public reaction to this case was the formation of a National Free Sharon Kowalski Day by LGBT activists and groups around the country. This event was celebrated by the public in 21 politically important and LGBT-friendly cities nationwide, including New York City, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. on August 7, 1988. Karen's fight brought passionate reactions from both sides, while it attempted to set a revolutionary precedent in recognizing LGBT guardianship. The publicity this case amassed shows how critical this case was for the LGBT community in the midst of a decade when LGBT couples were severely condemned and scrutinized.
With growing national support, Karen restarted her campaign for guardianship. On September 16, 1987, she began trying to regain visitation. For 2 long years, she fought in court to be allowed to visit Sharon, and finally, on February 2, 1989, with the recommendation of a team of court-appointed doctors, Karen Thompson was again allowed to see Sharon Kowalski. Being reunited with her partner after 3.5 years apart gave Karen momentum, and in early 1990, Karen Thompson again filed for guardianship of Sharon Kowalski. Soon after, Donald Kowalski resigned as guardian due to his own medical issues. Karen seemed to be the only candidate to take his place. However, on April 23, 1991, the court appointed the Kowalskis' friend Karen Tomberlin to be a neutral party, who, according to Judge Robert Campbell, would allow equal visitation. In designating Tomberlin guardian, the court overlooked their appointed medical experts' findings that Karen Thompson had the strongest relationship with Sharon, and granted guardianship to a woman who had never filed for it.
This ruling brought surprised and angry reactions from Thompson and her activist backers. Karen Tomberlin called herself a close personal friend of the Kowalskis, leading Karen Thompson to call Tomberlin just a stand-in for the parents. Meanwhile, Tom Stoddard, Lambda Legal Defense's director at the time, called the ruling a deep offense not only to all lesbians and gay men, but to all Americans who choose their partners. Karen Thompson then appealed this decision and was accompanied by friend of the court briefs from at least 13 organizations. These briefs helped her case, and on December 17, 1991, Karen Thompson was given guardianship of Sharon Kowalski.
The litigation surrounding Sharon Kowalski impacted same-sex couples in Minneapolis, Minnesota. When the city passed an ordinance allowing same-sex domestic partnerships in 1991, the argument over Sharon Kowalski's guardianship was cited, showing a direct influence on Minnesota's largest city. Another reform brought about by Karen Thompson's struggle was bringing living wills and similar documents to the attention of the LGBT community. These wills let you designate someone to take care of you and make decisions for you when you are incapacitated, allowing you to give your partner legal rights in times like Sharon's. This is an important capability for those unable to get other legal protection. In 1992, the Lambda Justice Center was formed in St. Paul, Minnesota. According to its founder, a lawyer named Robert Sikora, the center was established to offer living wills and other documents to avoid situations like the Thompson-Kowalski matter. The influence of in re guardianship of Sharon Kowalski Ward does not end with Minnesota, though. According to Tom Stoddard, Karen Thompson's separation from Sharon touched the deepest fears of every gay person, giving the case the power to revolutionize a struggling movement. Because this case showed how vulnerable same-sex relationships are without legal recognition, people reacted by working to legitimize their relationships, something that continues today.
Our case is 30 years old, and yet it's as current today as it was in 83.
By creating such an empathetic and lasting reaction, the case of Sharon Kowalski has helped reform the national LGBT rights movement to be a campaign focused on acceptance and recognition of same-sex relationships.